grateful, and thank you for that. I'm going to just quickly, as I can, relate a recent incident, and then ask you to respond. My colleague, Congressman Lewis, and I were at the airport a couple weeks ago on a Thursday, and because of weather, our flight was delayed and then delayed again and delayed again, and nobody was able to get any opportunity to discuss with anybody on the airline any alternatives that might be made available. Our distinguished acting chairman, Mr. Duncan, pointed out that some years ago, people in Russia had to wait to as many as 4 days to get an alternate flight. Well, that's exactly what happened to us here in our nation's capital. After the flight was finally canceled, again, no opportunity to talk with anybody, to get any information about anything. Nobody offering compensation for hotels or food, or nobody offering to put anyone on another airline. Everybody was just unilaterally informed that they wouldn't be able to get a flight out until the following Monday. And of course, it was Cherry Blossom Festival, and hotels are running $500–600 a month, a night, and needless to say, there was a lot of very upset people, and understandably so. Mr. Lewis and I were able to get a couple of tickets to a nearby city, and through a number of efforts, including my granddaughter, able to get back home. But there was, because the airline was overbooked in every flight, there was no place in America we could fly to and catch a connecting flight to get back to Minneapolis, Minnesota. I never would have believed that was possible. You know, for crying out loud, we could have flown to London and back, and you know, gotten home in a timely manner. So my question of each of you, and I know we only got 5 minutes here, but what kind of policy does each of you have for compensation for people that are caught in those circumstances? I understand weather caused the initial, but you know, can we extend the cause of weather to the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day? I mean, what kind of compensation do you offer? What kind of alternatives do you offer for other airlines? And what kind of communications do you offer to your customers in a situation like that, which is so troubling and confusing and difficult for so many airline passengers? Please.
Thank you, Congressman, and I hope that wasn't United, and I think it probably wasn't, but we...
it wasn't one of the airlines who was represented here today.
It was Minneapolis, so I guess I know what it was.
Yeah.
But we, at United, those follow-on cancellations, our policies will be to take care of the customers and treat them as if they're cancellations that are caused by us, and so to try to provide accommodations in follow-on cancellations that are occurring.
And then would you put them on another airline or compensate them?
We put several 100,000 people on other airlines, and in those situations, our focus in any of those situations is to take care of the customer first. Our operating people are not concerned with a P&L. They're focused on taking care of the customers.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kirby.
The same, Congressman. One thing I would add to your question is communication is incredibly important in those situations, and so we have minimum guidelines for intervals between communication updates that we ask our staff to adhere to. And we've also started asking our captains, who we know the customers have deep respect for, in certain irregular operations situations, to also provide an update.
Thank you.
And Congressman, really the same thing. We treat those follow-on cancellations the same way. We provide vouchers for hotels and meals and those kinds of things, but the desire is constantly to take care of the customer.
Ms. Filipovich.
Likewise for us at American, and as I've mentioned before, service recovery is really one of our top priorities, and I think your experience is illustrative of the importance of that. And when we get into irregular operations, making sure not only that we're communicating with customers, but we're providing options and providing compensation. So that's something that will always be our focus as well.
Mr. McGee.
Thank you, Congressman. Your joke about flying to London and back may not have been as absurd as you would think, because 2 years ago, I was on a Delta Airlines flight, of course, a U.S. carrier, out of Brussels. There was a mechanical delay for 4 hours. It was handled beautifully. It was textbook. And my companion said, "How would you rate Delta and how they've handled this?" and I said A+. But then I pointed out it had the exact same delay, the same mechanical problem, same aircraft, same crew, occurred not in Brussels, but in Atlanta, Delta's hometown. The results would have been very different. The reason that we were flying on a U.S. airline, the reason we were treated the way we were, and it was handled so beautifully with the meal vouchers, with the updates, with accommodations, was because the EU rules were in effect, even for foreign airlines in the EU. And when left to their own devices, unfortunately, situations like yours are not as rare as we would hope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ketko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank everybody on the panel for your testimony. I know you've been here for quite a while, and it's almost over, so hang in there. I'm just thinking back to when I first started traveling back in the 80s on airlines, and just how much has changed since that time. And I just want to kind of highlight a few things and then ask you a few questions. Reservations, it's very difficult to get a human being many times calling airlines nowadays, whereas before it was very easy, and there's much more you have to go online for. Food, you used to have a decent meal, it got to a snack, and now it's non-existent on many flights. Seats, and I'm 6'3", I'm not the tallest guy in the world, but it is often times where I can't even sit up straight in the seat. I have to stick my legs out in the aisle because the seats are so crammed together. The comfort of them is very difficult. The baggage fees, the overbooking, which we've talked about, frequent flyer miles. There was a time when you had frequent flyer miles where you could actually use them, and you could take a short flight or a flight somewhere, and there was a set amount. Now it's the miles are getting less and less powerful and less able to be used. Flight cancellations, planes sitting on runways for hours. You know, lack of instructions or information when people are sitting at the gates or sitting in the airplanes as to what's going on. And frustration just searching for tickets online or trying to figure out what a ticket price should be. You come to a conclusion after all this, and I understand what the shakeout has been in the industry the last several decades, but it really has come to this culture of basically commoditizing the passenger. And this culture, it seems to be one of indifference towards the passengers at times. And I looked at, when I was sitting here, just out of curiosity, to see how the airlines are doing. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I pulled up on Google. United made a profit of $2.9 billion last year. American, $2.7 billion. Southwest, $2.24 billion. And Alaska Airlines, $911 million. So you're doing good. And I understand there's times when you weren't doing good. I understand that's business. But now that you have this financial stability again, and I know the next crisis could be right around the corner, but now that you do, I've started thinking about the changes you announced today. And let's face it, and let's be honest with ourselves, you wouldn't be here announcing some of the changes were it not for reacting to a situation. But I'm wondering if any of these airlines have taken a step back to really look at what's happened to the culture of service and the culture of making it a much more pleasant experience. I think one of my colleagues on the Democratic side tells you basically how much of a hassle it is to fly. It's no longer pleasant to fly. There was a time when it was. It's no longer there. So do any of you ever take a look at the big picture? I don't want to hear about small programs here and there. Do you ever take a look and involve passengers in trying to think about how to make it a better experience and not wait for instances like this to happen with United or what happened with American? You ever stop and think and look back and say, okay, how can we get back to a time where there was more, passengers were treated with more appreciation, passengers were treated with more professionalism, and the overall experience was far more pleasant? Because I can tell you, I fly American a lot, and it's a fine airline. It gets me where I need to be, but it's not pleasant. It's hard. You can't even be comfortable in the seat when you sit down, and you're paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a ticket. That's difficult for me, and I think that that's a larger problem. And again, you're reacting. I'm asking you, don't react. Take a step back and look at the larger picture. So if anyone wants to respond to that, I'll be happy to listen.
Well, Congressman, first of all, thank you for choosing American for your travels. We appreciate that.